Welcome to our very first Analyst Day for autonomy.
He's just the best chip and system architect that I know in the world, and it's an honor to have you and your team at Tesla. At first, it seems improbable. How could it be that Tesla, who has never designed a chip before, would design the best chip in the world? But that is objectively what has occurred. Not best by a small margin, best by a huge margin. LiDAR is a fool's errand, and anyone relying on LiDAR is doomed. Doomed.
Tesla Throwback Thursday. Today we take a look at Tesla's first Autonomy Day. Without further ado, let's get to it.
Welcome to our very first Analyst Day for autonomy. I really hope that this is something we can do a little bit more regularly now to keep you posted about the development we're doing with regards to autonomous driving. From all the conversations that I keep having with investors on a regular basis, the biggest gap that I see with what I see inside the company and what the outside perception is our ability of autonomous driving. So now that we finally started to produce our full self-driving computer, we thought it's a good idea to just open the veil, invite everyone in, and talk about everything that we've been doing for the past 2 years. So about 3 years ago, we wanted to find the best possible chip for full autonomy. And we found out that there's no chip that's been designed from ground up for neural nets. So we invited my colleague Pete Bannon, the VP of Silicon Engineering, to design such chip for us. He's got about 35 years of experience of building chips and designing chips. About 12 of those years were for a company called PA Semi, which was later acquired by Apple. So he worked on dozens of different architectures and designs, and he was the lead designer, I think, for Apple iPhone 5 just before joining Tesla. And he's going to be joined on the stage by Elon Musk.
He's just the best chip and system architect that I know in the world, and it's an honor to have you and your team at Tesla. Well, take away, just tell them about the incredible work that you and your team have done.
Thanks, Elon. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and a real treat, really, to tell you about all the work that my colleagues and I have been doing here at Tesla for the last 3 years. I think we'll tell you a little bit about how the whole thing got started, and then I'll introduce you to the full self-driving computer and tell you a little bit about how it works. We'll dive into the chip itself and go through some of those details. I'll describe how the custom neural network accelerator that we designed works, and then I'll show you some results. And hopefully you'll all still be awake by then.
Nobody wants to see how the sausage is made. Just put some barbecue on that thing and serve it up to me, please.
I was hired in February of 2016. I asked Elon if he was willing to spend all the money it takes to do full custom system design. And he said, well, are we going to win? And I said, well, yeah, of course. So he said, I'm in. And so that got us started. We hired a bunch of people and started thinking about what a custom design chip for full autonomy would look like. We spent 18 months doing the design, and in August of 2017, we released the design for manufacturing. We got it back in December, it powered up, and it actually worked very, very well on the first try. We made a few changes and released a B0 Rev in April of 2018. In July of 2018, the chip was qualified, and we started full production of production quality parts. In December of 2018, we had the autonomous driving stack running on the new hardware, and we were able to start retrofitting employee cars and testing the hardware and software out in the real world. Just last March, we started shipping the new computer in the Model S and X, and just earlier in April, we started production in Model 3. So this whole program, from the hiring of the first few employees to having it in full production in all 3 of our cars, is just a little over 3 years, and is probably the fastest system development program I've ever been associated with, and it really speaks a lot to the advantages of having a tremendous amount of vertical integration to allow you to do concurrent engineering and speed up deployment. In terms of goals, we were totally focused exclusively on Tesla requirements, and that makes life a lot easier. If you have one and only one customer, you don't have to worry about anything else. One of those goals was to keep the power under 100 watts so that we could retrofit the new machine into the existing cars. We also wanted a lower part cost so we could enable full redundancy for safety. At the time, we had a thumb in the wind estimate that it would take at least 50 trillion operations a second of neural network performance to drive a car, and so we wanted to get at least that much, and really as much as we possibly could. Batch size is how many items you operate on at the same time. So for example, Google's TPU-1 has a batch size of 256, and you have to wait around until you have 256 things to process before you can get started. We didn't want to do that, so we designed our machine with a batch size of 1. So as soon as an image shows up, we process it immediately to minimize latency, which maximizes safety. We needed a GPU to run some post-processing. At the time, we were doing quite a lot of that, but we speculated that over time, the amount of post-processing on the GPU would decline as the neural networks got better and better, and that has actually come to pass. So we took a risk by putting a fairly modest GPU in the design, as you'll see, and that turned out to be a good bet. Security is super important. If you don't have a secure car, you can't have a safe car. So there's a lot of focus on security, and then, of course, safety. As Elon alluded earlier, there was really no ground-up neural network accelerator in existence in 2016. Everybody out there was adding instructions to their CPU or GPU or DSP to make it better for inference, but nobody was really just doing it natively. So we set out to do that ourselves. And then for other components on the chip, we purchased industry standard IP for CPUs and GPUs. That allowed us to minimize the design time and also the risk to the program. Another thing that was a little unexpected when I first arrived was our ability to leverage existing teams at Tesla. Tesla had wonderful power supply design teams, signal integrity analysis, package design, system software, firmware, board designs, and a really good system validation program that we were able to take advantage of to accelerate this program. Here's what it looks like. Over there on the right, you see all the connectors for the video that comes in from the 8 cameras that are in the car. You can see the 2 self-driving computers in the middle of the board, and then on the left is the power supply and some control connections. And so I really love it when a solution is boiled down to its barest elements. You have video, computing, and power, and it's straightforward and simple. The original hardware 2.5 enclosure that the computer went into, and we've been shipping for the last 2 years. Here's the new design for the FSD computer. It's basically the same. And that, of course, is driven by the constraints of having a retrofit program for the cars. I'd like to point out that this is actually a pretty small computer. It fits behind the glove box, between the glove box and the firewall in the car. It does not take up half your trunk.
This is April 22nd, 2019, when they displayed this for the world to see. Needless to say, Tesla has made significant strides as they are on hardware stack 4, which goes to show that Tesla isn't just satisfied with achieving something that is remarkable. They have bigger goals in mind as they progress on achieving something that has never been done before.
As I said earlier, there's 2 fully independent computers on the board. You can see them there highlighted in blue and green. To either side of the large SoC, you can see the DRAM chips that we use for storage, and then below left, you see the flash chips that represent the file system. So these are 2 independent computers that boot up and run their own operating system.
If I can add something, the general principle here is that any part of this could fail, and the car will keep driving. So you could have cameras fail, you could have power circuits fail, you could have one of the Tesla full self-driving computer chips fail, car keeps driving. The probability of this computer failing is substantially lower than somebody losing consciousness. That's the key metric, at least an order of magnitude.
Safety must be safe, or all of this is for naught.
So in terms of driving the car, the basic sequence is collect lots of information from the world around you. Not only do we have cameras, we also have radar, GPS, maps, the IMUs, ultrasonic sensors around the car. We have wheel ticks, steering angle. We know what the acceleration and deceleration of the car is supposed to be. All of that gets integrated together to form a plan. Once we have a plan, the 2 machines exchange their independent version of the plan to make sure it's the same. And assuming that we agree, we then act and drive the car. Now, once you've driven the car with some new control, you also want to validate it. So we validate that what we transmitted was what we intend to transmit to the other actuators in the car. And then you can use the sensor suite to make sure that it happens. So if you ask the car to accelerate or brake or steer right or left, you can look at the accelerometers and make sure that you are, in fact, doing that. So there's a tremendous amount of redundancy and overlap in both our data acquisition and our data monitoring capabilities here. Moving on to talk about the full self-driving chip a little bit. It's packaged in a 37.5 millimeter BGA with 1,600 balls. Most of those are used for power and ground, but plenty for signal as well. This is a 14 nanometer FinFET CMOS process. It's 260 millimeters in size, which is a modest sized die. So for comparison, a typical cell phone chip is about 100 millimeters square, so we're quite a bit bigger than that. But a high-end GPU would be more like 600 to 800 millimeters square. So we're sort of in the middle. I would call it the sweet spot. It's a comfortable size to build. There's 250 million logic gates on there and a total of 6 billion transistors, which even though I work on this all the time, that's mind-boggling to me. There's a safety system that contains 2 CPUs that operate in lockstep. This system is the final arbiter of whether it's safe to actually drive the actuators in the car. So this is where the 2 plans come together and we decide whether it's safe or not to move forward. And lastly, there's a safety system, and basically the job of the safety system is to ensure that this chip only runs software that's been cryptographically signed by Tesla. If it's not been signed by Tesla, then the chip does not operate. I've told you a lot of different performance numbers, and I thought it'd be helpful maybe to put it into perspective a little bit. So throughout this talk, I'm going to talk about a neural network from our narrow camera. It uses 35 billion operations, 35 gigaops. And if we used all 12 CPUs to process that network, we could do 1.5 frames per second, which is super slow, not nearly adequate to drive the car. If we use the 600 gigaflop GPU, the same network, we'd get 17 frames per second, which is still not good enough to drive the car with 8 cameras. The neural network accelerators on the chip can deliver 2,100 frames per second. And you can see from the scaling as we moved along that the amount of computing in the CPU and GPU are basically insignificant to what's available in the neural network accelerator. On the left, there's a cartoon of a neural network, just to give you an idea of what's going on. The data comes in at the top and visits each of the boxes, and the data flows along the arrows to the different boxes. The boxes are typically convolutions or deconvolutions with ReLUs. The green boxes are pooling layers. And the important thing about this is that the data produced by one box is then consumed by the next box, and then you don't need it anymore. You can throw it away. So all of that temporary data that gets created and destroyed as you flow through the network, there's no need to store that off chip in DRAM. So we keep all that data in SRAM. This chip is operating in a thermally constrained environment. So we had to be very careful about how we burn that power. We want to maximize the amount of arithmetic we can do. In terms of control, this is data that was published in a paper by Mark Horowitz at ISSCC, where he sort of critiqued how much power it takes to execute a single instruction on a regular integer CPU. And you can see that the add operation is only 0.15% of the total power. All the rest of the power is control overhead and bookkeeping. So in our design, we sought to basically get rid of all that as much as possible. So here's the design that we finished. You can see that it's dominated by the 32 megabytes of SRAM. There's big banks on the left and right and in the center bottom. And then all the computing is done in the upper middle. The accelerator has a relatively small instruction set. We have a DMA read operation to bring data in from memory. We have a DMA write operation to push results back out to memory. We have 3 dot product-based instructions: convolution, deconvolution, and inner product. And then 2 relatively simple scale is a 1 input, 1 output operation, and outwise is 2 inputs and 1 output. And then, of course, stop when you're done. So we take the neural network that's been trained by our vision team as it would be deployed in the older cars, and we take that and compile it for use on the new accelerator. To run a program, all the neural network descriptions programs are loaded into SRAM at the start, and then they sit there ready to go all the time. We had a goal to stay under 100 watts. This is measured data from cars driving around running the full autopilot stack, and we're dissipating 72 watts, which is a little bit more power than the previous design, but with the dramatic improvement in performance, it's still a pretty good answer. Of that 72 watts, about 15 watts is being consumed running the neural networks. In terms of cost, the silicon cost of this solution is about 80% of what we were paying before. And in terms of performance, we took the narrow camera neural network, which I've been talking about, that has 35 billion operations in it. We ran it on the old hardware in a loop as quick as possible, and we delivered 110 frames per second. We took the same data, the same network, compiled it for hardware for the new FSD computer, and using all 4 accelerators, we can get 2,300 frames per second processed. So a factor of 21.
I think this is perhaps the most significant slide. It's night and day.
I've never worked on a project where the performance increase was more than 3. So this was pretty fun. If you compare it to, say, NVIDIA's Drive Xavier solution, a single chip delivers 21 teraops. Our full self-driving computer with 2 chips is 144 teraops. To conclude, I think we've created a design that delivers outstanding performance, 144 teraops for neural network processing. It has outstanding power performance. We managed to jam all of that performance into the thermal budget that we had. It enables a fully redundant computing solution. It has a modest cost. And really the important thing is that this FSD computer will enable a new level of safety and autonomy in Tesla's vehicles without impacting their cost or range, something that I think we're all looking forward to.
The reason I asked Pete to do just a detailed, far more detailed than perhaps most people would appreciate, dive into the Tesla full self-driving computer is because at first it seems improbable. How could it be that Tesla, who has never designed a chip before, would design the best chip in the world? But that is objectively what has occurred. Not best by a small margin, best by a huge margin.
Tesla doesn't do anything half-assed. Best believe they're going to put their full ass into anything they do. The devil is in the details. I didn't understand 90% of anything about what was happening with those chips, but I do have an uncanny feeling that they know what the they're talking about.
It's in the cars right now. All Teslas being produced right now have this computer. We switched over from the NVIDIA solution for S and X about a month ago, and we switched over Model 3 about 10 days ago. All cars being produced have all the hardware necessary, compute and otherwise, for full self-driving. I'll say that again. All Tesla cars being produced right now have everything necessary for full self-driving. All you need to do is improve the software.
Improve the software. I wonder if regenerative artificial intelligence will have anything to do with that.
Trip Chaudhry, Global Equities Research, very, very impressive in every shape and form. Do you have flexibility for incorporating different activation functions rather than LU in your platform? Then I have a follow-up.
Yes, we do. We have implementations of TANH and sigmoid, for example.
Beautiful. I was wondering, wouldn't it make sense to come a little lower, maybe 10 nanometers, 2 years down, or maybe 7?
At the time we started the design, not all the IP that we wanted to purchase was available in 10 nanometer. So we finished the design in 14.
It's maybe worth pointing out that we finished this design like maybe 1.5, 2 years ago and began design of the next generation. We're not talking about the next generation today, but we're about halfway through it.
The next generation that's in my car right now. Very nice.
All the things that are obvious for a next generation chip we're doing.
Improving faster than anybody else can imagine.
You talked about the software as the piece now. You did a great job. I was blown away. Understood 10% of what you said, but I trust that it's in good hands.
You and me both, buddy. You and me both.
So maybe on the chip side, the last slide was 144 trillions of operations per second versus, was it NVIDIA at 21?
That's right.
And maybe can you just contextualize that for a finance person, why that's so significant, that gap?
And it's a factor of 7 in performance delta, so that means you can do 7 times as many frames. You can run neural networks that are 7 times larger and more sophisticated. So it's a very big currency that you can spend on lots of interesting things to make the car better.
To the best of my knowledge, the power requirements would increase at least to the same degree, a factor of 7, and costs would also increase by a factor of 7. Power is a real problem because it also reduces range. So it has the penalty for power is very high, and then you have to get rid of that power by the thermal problem becomes really significant because you got to get rid of all that power.
It's a fucking complicated problem. Who in their right mind would spend the money to tackle it?
Pradeep Ramani from UBS. Intel and AMD, to some extent, have started moving towards a chiplet-based architecture. I did not notice a chiplet-based design here. Do you think that looking forward, that would be something that might be of interest to you guys from an architecture standpoint?
We're not currently considering anything like that. I think that's mostly useful when you need to use different styles of technology. So if you want to integrate silicon germanium or DRAM technology on the same silicon substrate, that gets pretty interesting. But until the die size gets obnoxious, I wouldn't go there.
Yeah, to be clear, like the strategy here, and this started basically a little over 3 years ago, was design and build a computer that is fully optimized and aiming for full self-driving, then write software that is designed to work specifically on that computer and get the most out of that computer. So you have tailored hardware that is a master of one trade, self-driving. NVIDIA is a great company, but they have many customers. And so as they apply their resources, they need to do a generalized solution. They care about one thing, self-driving. So that it was designed to do that incredibly well. The software is also designed to run on that hardware incredibly well. And the combination of the software and the hardware, I think, is unbeatable.
Hi, the chip is designed to process video input. In case you use, let's say, LiDAR, would it be able to process that as well, or is it primarily for video?
What we're going to explain to you today is that LiDAR is a fool's errand. And anyone relying on LiDAR is doomed. Doomed. Expensive sensors that are unnecessary. It's like having a whole bunch of expensive appendices. Like one appendix is bad, well, now they want to put a whole bunch of them. That's ridiculous. You'll see.
Two questions. Just on the power consumption, is there a way to maybe give us like a rule of thumb on, every watt reduces range by a certain percent or a certain amount, just so we can get a sense of how much of an improvement?
A Model 3, the target consumption is 250 watts per mile.
Basically, power is the power of the system has a massive impact on city range, which is where we think most of the robotaxi market will be. Power is extremely important.
Graham Tanaka, Tanaka Capital. Just curious how defensible your chip technologies and design is from a IP point of view, and hoping that you won't be offering a lot of the IP to the outside for free. Thanks.
We have filed on the order of 12 patents on this technology. Fundamentally, it's linear algebra, which I don't think you can patent. I'm not sure, but we'll try.
I think if somebody started today and they were really good, they might have something like what we have right now in 3 years. But in 2 years, we'll have something 3 times better.
They may catch up to Tesla where they were in 2019. But Tesla ain't standing still, folks. They are moving at a breakneck pace. No one can keep up. The time, energy, and money wasted would be for naught, as you cannot hope to create a better product that Tesla is going to release.
Talking about the intellectual property protection, you have the best intellectual property, and some people just steal it for the fun of it. Do you think your chip can do something to prevent anybody, maybe encrypt all the weights so that even you don't know what the weights are at the chip level, so that your intellectual property remains inside it and nobody knows about it and nobody can just steal it?
Man, I'd like to meet the person that could do that, because I would hire them in a heartbeat. We do encrypt it's a hard chip to crack. So if they can crack it, it's very good. If they can then crack it and then also figure out the software and the neural net system and everything else, they can design it from scratch. Like that's a...
It's our intention to prevent people from stealing all that stuff, and if they do, we hope it at least takes a long time.
It will definitely take them a long time. Yeah. The thing that's, I think, a very powerful, sustainable advantage for us is the fleet. Nobody has the fleet. Those weights are constantly being updated and improved based on billions of miles driven. Tesla has 100 times more cars with the full self-driving hardware than everyone else combined. It's similar to like, how like the Google search engine has a massive advantage because people use it. And people are effectively programming Google with their queries and their results.
Press you on that, and please reframe the question because I'm a tech layman if it's appropriate. But when we talk to Waymo or NVIDIA, they do speak with equivalent conviction about their leadership because of their competence in simulating miles driven. Can you talk about the advantage of having real-world miles versus simulated miles? Because I think they expressed that by the time you get 1 million miles, they can simulate 1 billion. And no Formula One race car driver, for example, could ever successfully complete a real-world track without driving in a simulator. Can you talk about the advantages it sounds like that you perceive to have associated with having data ingestion coming from real-world miles versus simulated miles?
Absolutely. I mean, the simulator, we have quite a good simulation too, but it just does not capture the long tail of weird things that happen in the real world. If the simulation fully captured the real world, well, I mean, that would be proof that we're living in a simulation, I think.
It's not the quantity of miles driven, it's the quality. Now, Tesla's got way more quality miles driven, that's for sure. But they're also doing simulation, benefiting from the best parts of both of those worlds. Whereas if you're only using simulation, how could you possibly know whether or not the real world data is better than your simulated data? Because you have an insignificant amount of data to work with in the real world.
Simulations do not capture the real world. The real world's really weird and messy. You need the cars on the road. We're actually going to get into that in Andre and Stuart's presentation. Yeah, sure. So, okay, why don't we move on to Andre?
It seems as if class is running a bit long. Those Q&As definitely took up a lot of our time. We're gonna break this down and start again fresh next Thursday, Andre Karpathy. But that's all I got for you today. Office hours in the comments. Be easy. Peace.